Hello and welcome to Black Writers Read. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 11 of season 5 of the series. My name is Nicole Young Martin and I'm the founder, producer, and host of the podcast. So just a heads up before we get started, for those of you who have been longtime supporters and followers, guess what's back? My cough. So I'm hoping I can hold out through the interview, but it's back. Whenever I get an upper respiratory infection, I get a long, lingering cough that sounds like I'm dying. So I hope I can make it through the episode without coughing up a lung. So let's go ahead and get started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted 70 authors representing 10 plus genres from 5 countries and 20 states. Our platform includes the live stream interviews, the audio podcasts, book clubs, and curriculum development assistance. Find us online at blackwritersread.com. Today is a very special episode. I am excited to chat with someone who I've gotten to know both personally and professionally in real life over the past few years. I've learned a lot from today's guest as a writer and also as a career coach. Today, we welcome Crystal Center Brown to the Black Writers Read virtual platform. Crystal Center Brown's life purpose can be summed up in one sentence: empowering women and children. And Crystal lives her purpose every single day, and I see this all the time, which is so beautiful. Whether it is by publishing books that teach children the importance of being kind to others, leading writing workshops in the community, speaking at local schools, or leading the Career Center at Bay Path University. She has authored 12 books to date and is currently working on her 13th. One of her novels, The Rhythm in Blue, was turned into a feature film and won several awards at film festivals around the world. Crystal is a recipient of BusinessWest Difference Maker Award for her work empowering and inspiring women and young girls. She is certified as a Gallup Strengths career coach and recently began her work to earn her doctorate in education in the same program that I graduated from. Married to the love of her life for almost 25 years, she is also a mother and dog mom. Many of you may recall that we read her book, The Rhythm in Blue, for our in-person book club earlier this fall. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please buy it. Actually, buy her entire catalog of books. Also, the film is available on Amazon Video to rent or to purchase. Today, Crystal will share excerpts from her second poetry collection, But She Has Such a Pretty Face, which was released in 2014. Happy 10th birthday. Here's what Crystal offers about But She Has a Pretty Face. Every time someone would say to me, "But you have such a pretty face," I would cringe and think, but what about the rest of me? But you have such a pretty face tells my story through a series of 43 poems. Oh, wait, let me go back. I missed something. I would cringe and think, but what about the rest of me? But you have such a pretty face tells my story through a series of 43 poems. I wrote about my childhood in Morristown, Tennessee, the poems Home, Ellis Tambourine, That Time When My Brother Jerome Was Evil Knievel, Marriage, the poems Before Dawn, Loving Out Loud, Love, poems Lucky Jeans, Flirt, Motherhood, the poem for AJ at 17, and First Bath, Relationships, poems 21st Morning, Monsters in the Closet, Family, through the poems Welcome Home, the Droopy Boob Haiku, which I love, The Importance of Fatherhood, the poems The Luckiest Girl on Earth, Disposable Dad, When Everything Was New, to Learning to Love My Body at Every Size, Chunk, and Beautiful Me. I hope that no matter who you are, you'll find a few poems that you can relate to. Whether you are a mother, wife, father, sister, poet, college student, mess talker, best friend, or just a girl with more than a pretty face, I hope you enjoy the read. To learn more about Crystal and her very expansive body of work, please visit her website at crystalcenterbrown.com. That is CrystalCenterbrown.com. Throughout her reading, I'll be sharing the link to her website and also to her Instagram. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of the show. Crystal will read excerpts from her work, then we'll chat. If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to Q&A for those who are joining us today. We typically have viewers joining us from Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time during our chat. I'd now like to officially welcome Crystal Center Brown to the virtual stage. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Oh my God, it's so glad. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm
Like,
glad to be here.
yeah, and just exposing you to the entire Black Writers Read community, which I got my digest of who listens to the podcast. And ironically, I was very surprised. The two places that has the most listeners to the podcast and to the series are Singapore and San Francisco,
Wow,
which is,
that's amazing.
yeah. So I'm really excited to have you on the virtual platform and getting your work out there to so many more in the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think I told you back when we met a few months ago that this is the first time I've done a performance like this in a long time. So I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Yeah. So the stage is yours, Crystal. Have fun
Okay.
reading.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to share a few poems with you from But You Have Such a Pretty Face, and I hope you enjoy them. She is not nearly as pretty as my mother. My brother and I make faces at her when she's not looking. Her dress is always too tight and her hair is teased and dyed, but she makes my father feel young again. My mother doesn't know about her. One day, she and my father dropped me and my brother off at the Main Street movie complex, giving us $20 each, and we ate our way through all things good, buttery, and sweet. And 6 hours later, we stepped back out onto the sidewalk to await our father, but he never comes. So we board the last bus of the day, our stomachs aching, not from the pounds of butter and sugar and salt, but what we knew would happen once we arrived back home. Just as we stepped off the bus, our daddy's white Cadillac speeds up beside us. Daddy, we both yelled as if we had not seen him in all of our years. Just then, our mother peeks out the front door, her head a halo of blue plastic rollers. Come inside, she yells, before you catch your death. And we fall in line, her army of misfits, sitting down to a dinner of daddy's favorites, fried chicken, corn, and sweet potatoes. Just as we take our first bite, our mother asks, where on earth have you been for the entire day and night? And without a second thought, my brother and I yell, we saw 3 movies. Just as my father says, we went fishing on the lake. The room swelled. Our words hung in the air with no one to rescue them, and the only sound that dared to remain was fork scraping plate, fork scraping plate. And that is called Good Man. This one is called Loving Out Loud. He hates opera, says hip hop is the future, and I nod and say nothing. Turn it down, I beg. He's happiest when his music is harassing the birds. While driving, we are more like strangers than man and wife. 1/3 of our lives have been spent this way. In his car, fighting about which station to play. As the steam rises from my ears, he calls me dear, and he turns the channel to NPR where we listen to other people fight about nothing. But he knows my strange ways. He has helped write my story. Seeing me at my very best and worst, he calms me with just a glance. He is my Sunday revival. My sonnet, when I can't find the words, he taps his fingers along my spine, pulling the poems right out of me. He sells my spirit to the clouds. Who needs music when love is this loud? This one is called Lucky Jeans. I secretly envy your favorite blue jeans. Every stitch, button, crease, and seam, because although they mean nothing to you, they spend every daylight hour doing everything you do. And sure, every night they are tossed on the floor, piled up and abandoned by your bedroom door. But oh, how I long to spend just one day as a crease on your thighs or a button at your waist. This one is called Home. When I am home, I am 7 again. I am dusty pigtails and 5 best friends. I am hopscotch on hot sidewalks wearing pink jelly shoes. I am fourth in line at the dollar pool. When I am home, I am the Christmas parade on Main Street. I am two tiny bare feet in Panther Creek. I am a Dairy Queen chocolate dipped ice cream cone and Saturday morning cartoons with my big brother Jerome. When I am home, I am the tent revival on Wednesday nights. I am that brass offering plate with the crushed velvet lining. I am Amazing Grace and the taste of fried chicken. I am red Kool-Aid and switches picked for lickings. When I am home, I am slowed down, whole. I am the daughter of Janice and Joe. I am Miss Francis's granddaughter and Ella's twin, and I am the poet who has to stop to remember to take it all in when I am home. This is one of my favorite ones. This is called Flirt. Your shoes are shine like brand new dimes, hair shimmering with coconut oil. Your skin is satin, black like the night, your teeth little seashells, sweet and pure. You're so smooth that the ocean follows you all around and your mambo makes the world dance. And I don't know your name, but I know your stop and the sounds of your gum popping in my left ear. I just wish I could make time stand still just long enough to feel the warmth of your skin because next to me, you are like a chocolate cloud and I want to scoop you up and suck you in. But you don't know me from anybody else. I mean, we all ride the same train. You never spoken my name, but in my mind, we are already married with kids. White picket fence, stock dividends, bushes neatly trimmed, a nanny named Kim, and so deep in love. Well, perhaps one day I'll get the courage to say, join me after work for coffee or whatever usually follows meetings like that. And your hat pulled snugly, perhaps you'll approach me and agree to join me. And we'll sip and sit and chat about this and that and run away and fall in love maybe one day. But for now, I'll watch you from my seat, awaiting the day we will finally meet and tumble into this life in my mind. In due time, you'll be mine. This one is called Before Dawn. The sound of your breath on the outskirts of a dream flies high above me. Thick with hours of night, rest, and love, in the dark your lips find mine. The hour is before dawn, before the first stretch, first yawn of good morning. The warmth of you wraps around me, my soul sings your glory. You light the night with love, peeling away the grit of the day. Our renewal a web, carefully spun, each and every morning like this one. We still don't need words, just legs around waist and breasts against back. We beg the sun for a few moments more. Our love is simple and divine. You are my air, my breath, my soul, my everything, and you are the reason my heart sings. So my last one is going to be, what my last one going to be? Dandelion. I sometimes wonder if you can sense the way your energy fills a room and how knees begin to buckle and bend at the mere sight of you, and how sharing the same space often ignites the same firework filled frenzies. You are combustible, buttoned up, a Windsor not for the weary. Even on your off day, sex seems to seep from every available ounce of you. And when your smile begins to descend upon your lips, I quietly picture my own brushing against them. The assembly line of adoration forms, and soon there is no room for me. They dive in hips first, swimming in your contagious grin, but you know you will never be without a warm bed. You know there will always be the hungry ones, the eager ones struggling up from the cracks of the earth like dandelions after the first rain in May. Thank you.
I am like, I'm hearing so much of like Jill Scott, Gwendolyn Brooks,
Hmm.
um, Erica Badu, like just I'm like sitting in a coffee shop and there's a band playing and you're just going
Yes.
like and I'm so glad with folks. Thank you for joining us today. Crystal's work is also available via audio. Like there's the poem you did, Mother, on
Yes.
iTunes, and
Yep.
there's also a couple of your works you're reading flash fiction on Amazon Music. And it's a skill, and people don't. I feel like people don't really honor the oral tradition of poetry
Right.
and those beginnings, and also too like performing poetry, lifting it off the page is its own art, because there's like the published
Yes.
page, and then there's the performance aspect of it, and you do it so beautifully. So thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. I started out with spoken word, back in the 90s, I ran an open mic. So I think that for me, that was my beginning. I was performing poetry as a child, but I just always loved doing it with a band. Because I love to sing as well. So I think it all just fit for me. And Jill Scott, definitely, that's a compliment because I love her.
Oh my gosh, she is amazing.
She is.
So let's get our conversation started. So you mentioned that, and I think also too, I read somewhere that you started poetry at 6. Can you give us a little bit more background in terms of when you discovered your literary voice?
Yeah, so my mom actually taught art at a college it's closed now, but it used to be an HBCU that was in my hometown, and it was the Morristown campus for Knoxville College. And so my mother taught art there, and there was an English teacher there named David English, which was funny, that was his last name. And he would have poetry classes in the basement of this church that was right at the bottom of the hill of where that college was at. And so my brother and I would, he'd pick us up in the van and we'd go down there and we would learn poetry. And they were planning this. You know how we always have these Black History Month like fashion shows and stuff. We used to do that back in the day. I'm not sure if they still do it now. But these like fashion shows, right? And they said, "Oh, Crystal can do a poem." So they gave me this poem called "The Negro Mother" by Langston Hughes.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was 6 years old. And just think about this handwritten out on a piece of paper. And I remember it being double-sided. And I memorized it. And Dobbins Minute High School in Kingsport, Tennessee is the first place that I performed. I remember being on stage at 6 with that spotlight on me and seeing all those people in the crowd. And I never wanted to forget that. So I've been performing since then. So I didn't start performing though my own poetry until I was in my 20s, but I was doing other people's work since I was little.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And like how, this is an aside question, and also too, I ask a question about, because we talk, like you talk about just being brave. Like I'm just imagining a 6-year-old Crystal with the braids on stage
Hmm.
at 6, and you
Yes,
memorize what I'm like, wow.
I did. It was exciting. And of course, at 6 years old, you don't know anything about poetry. But
No.
I knew that I loved being able to memorize something, being able to speak with my own voice, and being able to hear the applause of people, in front of me. So for me, I was hooked at that age.
Nice. So, how has your work evolved since publishing your first collection of poetry, Double Dutch, which was released? I'm like, wow, you've been writing for a minute.
I have.
This
Yes.
was published in 2006. So, I would love to know, how do you think your work has evolved since your first book?
I feel like my poetry in Double Dutch was a lot more about motherhood and more about even relationships. And of course, when I look back at that book now, I see typos in it and I see what I consider to be
Okay.
mistakes. But it really was my raw voice. I didn't have an editor for that book. I published it through a company called Lulu. And so back in those times, you just kind of just published it. If you had an idea, you published it. So I think when I look at that book compared to But You Have Such a Pretty Face, I feel like it's more comprehensive. The second book is more comprehensive. It covers more topics. And I think it's more relatable for a larger audience because I think it covers grief, it covers motherhood, it covers relationships, even like employment issues. And so I think anyone can pick that book up and see themselves in it. I think Double Dutch was a much younger book. And so I think that's the difference.
Wow, nice. I love how, and I asked a question about this later, but I love how self reflective you are about your work.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anyone looks back, even artists will look back at their old work and think I could have done that better. And some people are tempted to republish or go back and fix mistakes that's in your old work. And for me,
Mm.
I keep getting better. And so I want to be able to have proof of what I've done.
Nice. And speaking of, your canon of work includes fiction, poetry, both on the published page and spoken word, a
Hmm.
screenplay, journals, and children's books. I'd
Yes.
love to know how you approach writing for each of these genres, especially given that they're for very different audiences.
That's a great question. So for the children's books, our goal always, my mom was my illustrator, and so our goal always was to teach kindness to children, kindness and curiosity. That's always going to be our. And so you'll notice that the children in our books are either going on an adventure, so they're either going out with their mother to the museum, or they're flying on a kite, to see the world without Black inventions, or they're looking through their closet to give away clothing and food to the pantry. And so for me, I want to be able to, bring these books into the schools and kids leave with those books and really feel empowered that they can make a difference, or at least be curious enough to learn how to make a difference. So for children, that's the goal. For adults, I want them to leave with a message of redemption. Every single story that I write has something happen where someone makes a mistake and they're having to be forgiven. And so for me, I want to be able to, not just in my poetry, but also in my novels, to be able to tell a story of people forgiving each other and people loving on each other no matter what. And so that for sure. And so for that movie to be made out of one of my books, it brought it to an even wider audience, maybe people who don't read often, they still can hear that story of redemption.
And I love that The Rhythm in Blue was adapted into film, because as I tell a lot of my students are like, some like to read, some like to watch. And I'm like, we need more of our work accessible in different medium so that everyone can access the story.
Yes, yes, yes. It's so important. I love movies too. I love to read too. I read all the time, but I think movies, it opens it up to a younger audience. Maybe they would not pick a book up. And so I was excited to be able to see it made into a movie.
Yes. So your personal and professional mission, I'm so excited to ask this question because this is my entry point to you and your work.
Mhm.
Your personal and professional mission is to empower women and children. How does your life purpose emerge in your writing, which you shared kind of a little bit already on
Yeah.
that?
So I think my poetry for sure, when I do poetry performances or any sort of readings, when there are women in the audience, no matter how old they are, if I'm going into, I do a lot of readings at like retirement homes or retirement communities. And so I didn't think that that audience was my audience. Honestly, I thought I only wrote for women that were actively raising children or actively, in relationships. But a lot of these women are there because they've lost a spouse, men have lost a spouse. And so they're able to see themselves in my writing, especially my writing about loss and about grief. And so I feel like after my mom passed away a few years ago, my writing did shift a bit into more about healing yourself and and honoring your grief, like whatever that looks like, even if it takes a long time. And so I think it shifted a bit. So it went from empowering and encouraging to honoring people where they are, and even if that means they need to heal a little bit, and that's okay.
Nice. So I'd like to transition to talking about the poetry collection, but you have such a pretty face, which I have right here, which I love that it's all pictures of you as a young child.
Mhm. It's like someone said it was like a milk carton, like a missing child. I'm like, not what it's supposed to look like, but okay, sure.
You're like, no, Crystal cannot be missing.
Right. I was like, that's awful. But yeah, and I looked the same as I did as a child, which is hilarious.
You do.
I
You
really do.
do. It's the picture. I hope folks get the book. The picture is so cute.
I hope they do because the digital version has a different cover. So if you want the one with little crystal on it, you got to get the hard copy.
Little Crystal, I love it. So the poems are so deeply personal, self-reflective, covering a range of themes, including love, fatherhood, which I love. You do an entire
Mhm.
section on Black men and boys. Love, fatherhood, motherhood, sizism, and body image, coming of age, self-love, and family, which thank you for reading Dandelion, because I loved Dandelion.
Yes, yeah.
Um, so, what is the origin story of But You Have Such a Pretty Face? And then, can you talk about how you came up with the title and how you selected the poems for this particular collection?
Okay. So I've been told, since I was very young, that I have such a pretty face. And it's because I've always been chubby. My whole life, I've always been a little bit chubby. And now I'm a plus size woman. And so even people now, if they meet me, if they don't know me well, they may make that comment that I have such a pretty face, but you have such a pretty face. And for me, it was not really a compliment, really, right? Because you want to be like, well, what about the rest of me? And so that's how I came up with the title of it. I actually thought it was going to be mostly poems about my body and about dealing with other people and about just trying to heal myself as a woman. But it ended up being stories for about 10 years of being a mom, being a wife, working out in the world, friendships, and then fatherhood. And so that's how the title came about. And I chose the poems based on topics I thought people would want to read about. So I thought I always think about what I would want to read in a collection. And for me, if I always want to read about other people's, experiences. I love reading about Black men and writing about Black men, so I had to have a chapter in there about that. And then about parenting. So parenting and whatever that looks like. If you're an aunt, if you're a grandmother, if you have pets,
Mhm.
anyone that you're loving on and helping to support and feed and raise, I think that counts as parenthood.
Yeah, and thank you too, because I eventually want to have on authors who talk about Black men and Black masculinities, because I think
Hmm.
it's a topic that I'm not going to say it's neglected, but it is neglected because of just the representation that is out there. And I'm like, yo, like a couple of authors that I had on recently, like Saban, who I had on last week, just talking about like the vulnerability, because he talked a lot about loss in his work.
Yeah.
Like the grief process, the vulnerability, the humility, the humbleness, and also too like the loneliness that
Right.
Black men experience because we're
Mhm.
socialized to where Black women can have community and Black men have to be alone. So
Exactly.
so I really appreciate and I think this is coming from the vantage point of being a mother, educator, and a wife. Thank you. Like there's an entire section dedicated to Black men and boys in
Yeah.
this book, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that was important to me. I think that Black men get they're given a hard time. Of course, sometimes they deserve it. I'll be honest, but there are a lot of times that they don't. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of us, especially as Black women, we might base how we feel about Black men on our own relationships with our own fathers and our own grandfathers and our own. If our own fathers weren't present, luckily I have a great dad. So I was never viewing anyone through that lens. And all the Black men in my life are wonderful. And so it was important for me to write not just about Black men in general, but also Black fathers who are often left out of things, right? They're excluded. And sometimes moms don't support them in the way that they should because maybe their hearts are broken because of what they did to them. So they're not able to kind of frame that man in a positive way for their child. And so I try to write about Black men as much as I can because it's really important to me. And as you can see behind me, there's a painting
Yeah.
of Black
Oh,
men that my mom did. So my mom
oh,
also painted
wow.
Black men a lot. So I saw that a lot growing up.
Nice. And then also too, just thank you for calling attention to like the broken heart. And I think that's where a lot of I'm committing malpractice because I'm not a psychotherapist or a psychologist, but I think a lot of the actions of people is because of the broken heart and they have to kind of get that out.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. And it's unfortunate for the child because a man can be a great father and not be a good partner.
Yeah.
And so I think that's hard for us as women to understand that, but you have to be able to get out of your own way and let your child have a relationship with their father, especially if
Yeah.
he's trying, right? Even if he broke your heart, you have to move past that and let him see his children.
Yeah. In many of the poems, and But You Have Such a Pretty Face, and this is a craft question. Each stanza is so tightly written to where they can each exist as their own poem. Like even
Yeah.
hearing you read today, I was like, that three sentences can be its own poem. Like it's
Yeah.
just so nicely written. Can you talk about how
Thank you.
talk about how you construct stanzas, and then also I'd love to know why you've chosen because also too, as you mentioned in this book, you talk a lot about and explore various types of relationships and the ways people connect to one another. So, and also too, like how family, yourself, and how men and boys are viewed in society. So it's a multi-layered craft question.
I
So it's
see
like,
that. Yeah.
yeah, which I tend to do a lot.
That's okay. You have great questions.
Yeah, thank you. So first, if you'd like to talk about constructing stanzas,
Hmm.
and then also too, like the focus on the various types of relationships and connections that people can have with one another.
So I believe that, well, this is my own opinion.
Yeah.
I took one poetry class like when I was 22, maybe at Stick. That was the
Oh,
only formal class I took, and it was really not even poetry; it was just creative writing. So it wasn't even like I've never learned how to really write a poem. I'm learning now, and so that is just I think just how I write. It's how I speak. And I've had teachers in the past who have graded poetry tell me that I needed to do it differently. But for me, I just wanted to be readable and understandable. And
mhm,
so it was not intentional. It was just that's just I'm very succinct with my writing. And so I think that anyone who has an idea for a poem, just get it out on paper. It doesn't have to rhyme. As you can see, my
yeah,
poems don't rhyme. They do kind of most of them do follow some sort of rhythm though.
yeah.
So and people say I do have a style, which I've never really seen it. But I think just getting it out on paper, and if it ends up being tight, that's just how it is. That's just for me. It's not intentional. I think it's just how I write naturally.
Wow. And I want to say, and this is something else too, because it comes across from my work for folks who are watching. I do poetry, plays, and I'm exploring now a
Hmm.
memoir and creative nonfiction. And even though I'm a creative, but in theater and music, I, fell into writing and
Hmm.
I've taken a couple of workshops and things like that, but I've never really taken a class or done a degree. And a lot of the critiques that I get, particularly on my poetry, because playwriting, I have a background in theater. So my approach
Right.
to that writing is different. But poetry in particular, they're like, this isn't poetry, blah, 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 blah. But I'm
Hmm.
like, but also my audience connects more to the work because of the emotion and the lack of, I think, the lack of rules and the restrictions, because poetry can be, if you've learned formally, can be very restrictive. And I
Absolutely.
find, yeah, and I find, and I think this resonates a lot in the African diasporic part of the canon. I
Yeah.
believe it's more about what is the emotion we're trying to convey and how we're going to connect, rather than we need to follow the nuances of the rules of poetry. So I am grateful that you don't
Yes.
have as much formal training in poetry, because I think that formal training may limit you a little bit.
It would have, absolutely would have. And I think, at the beginning of me writing, in my 20s, I was writing for the stage. So it is different
Oh.
also. I think when you're for me anyway, when I'm writing a poem that's going to go in a book, but I'm not really thinking about performing it, it might have a little bit more structure to it. And in fact, it does. But if I'm writing it to perform it, it's going to have a cadence in it where I'm going to speak it. And so even the words that rhyme may not look like they rhyme on paper, but if I read it out loud, you'll be able to find
Mhm.
that connection and the rhythm in that poem.
Nice. Prior to having guests on Black Writers Read, we ask each of them why they write. Here's what you wrote. I have been a writer since I was 5 years old. I found it as a way to share my thoughts, but as I got older, it also became an escape. When I was able to see one of my books turned into a feature film, that fueled the fire in me to write even more, because I realized that my stories will reach a much broader audience. Being an author during this time means being responsible. And I love this. I'm going to repeat it.
Mhm.
Being an author during this time means being responsible for sharing the stories of those who have not found their voices yet. I
Yes.
tell everyone I believe there is a story in all of us. The key is to being brave enough to share it, being brave enough to open doors for other people to share theirs as well. So, what advice would you share with a younger Crystal to prepare
Mm.
her for the brave and beautiful writing journey she has ahead?
That's a great question. So I would tell myself to have more confidence younger, right? Because, doing poetry at a open mic when I was 21, I wish I'd had the courage to do that sooner. I was always worried when I was much younger. I was always worried about what other people thought about what I was writing, because I would write about things that other people weren't writing about. And so I would tell myself to start the open mic earlier. We started it in 96. I would have started it probably in 93 after my son was born. And I probably would have continued it longer. I think we stopped it right before 2000, and I would have continued it. And so luckily, other open mics popped up after mine stopped. Other
Mhm,
ones started to begin, and so I was able to continue going to them. But I
mhm.
wish I had continued organizing them because I really enjoy it.
Wow. And open mics, for folks, if you're not familiar with that mode of like poetry sharing, it can either be very beautiful or it can be very destructive. I've been a
Hmm.
part of those types of open mics. It's either the ones that are like, we applaud everyone is
Yeah.
a writer, everyone is brilliant, or it can be, oh my God, it could be literally like
Yep.
Showtime at the Apollo. So
Oh yeah. Yeah. Especially poetry slams, right?
yeah.
I've competed at New Eurekan in New York City, and won New Eurekan before. And with my kind of poetry, which is unheard of because New Eurekan poets, as you can see, they have a whole different style, right?
Yes.
And mine was very different. So I was surprised actually that I won, but I think I won because it was very different. People weren't used to hearing love poems up on that stage. Yeah.
And you, like, that's the thing. In my, like, next iteration of writing, I really want to explore romance and love too. And so
Yes.
your work is very inspirational in that
Thank
way.
you.
Yeah. So, as a Black woman author who exists among several communities, including as an educator,
Mhm.
career coach, mother, wife, daughter, sister, mentor, community contributor, activist, and friend, how do you hope for your work to inform the literary canon and represent and speak to and for the culture?
So, I tell my story all the time whenever I have the opportunity, especially on campus, Bay Pass campus, because we work with a lot of young women. And a lot of them think that I came into that space in the traditional way, that I graduated high school, went to college, got my master's, and then started teaching.
Mhm.
And That's not what happened. I actually had a child at 18 in high school. My last year of high school, I had a baby about a month after my son was born. And so So I'm able to tell them like my story is that, right? I ended up going to college late in life, got my master's late in life. I just started my doctorate at 50. And so my message to everybody is it's never too late. Like no matter how old you are, it is never too late for you to tell your story. And I believe there's a story in all of us. And so I encourage my students, I encourage the coaching clients that I have that are, in their 70s and restarting a career, thinking they want to do something different. I encourage them to do that because I feel like we're like, especially women, we're told that when you turn 50, that things start to go downhill at that point, right? You just start to check out mentally. And if you've been on a job forever, you just stay. And I encourage you, if you're feeling like you don't want to do that work anymore, to step out and do something different.
Mm. And I have 5 years till I'm 50, and I'm excited to be 50.
Yes, I'm telling you, this year when I turned 50, it was like a light bulb came on in my head, and I was just like recharged almost. I can't even explain it.
Nice. So we're almost done. I have just a couple more questions. So
Yeah.
this one, I wanted to open some space to honor Nikki Giovanni, who passed
Yes.
away earlier this week. And
Yes.
in a recent Instagram post, you reflect on your relationship with Miss Giovanni, who became an ancestor earlier this week, which many of us are extremely devastated.
Yeah.
She contributed a quote for your book, Double Dutch, and your poem, A Poem for Black Girls, is a tribute to Giovanni's A Poem for Black Boys.
Hmm.
How would you say we should continue to work with Giovanni and pass the torch to the next generation of cultural contributors and creators?
So what I loved about Nikki was that she was so open to meeting younger poets. I sent her a letter when I published Double Dutch almost 20 years ago. I sent her a letter in the mail, sent her a copy of the book, and I asked her if she would write a blurb for it. And within a month, I had a letter back from her with the blurb, and then I got to meet her soon after that. And so that's one thing that we can do is to be open to other poets, other writers. I haven't always been great about that. I'll be honest. I've been so busy. I feel like I don't have time, but I'm going to start making time for that because I think that especially the older poets owe it to the next generation to welcome them in, usher them in, and don't worry about them being better than you, right? Because you want someone that's better than you. But the other piece of it is to continue her work around Black joy. She wrote a lot about that and like joy in every circumstance. She talked about that a lot, and so I think we, especially the next year that we have coming up, we can anchor ourselves in joy in all areas, and to share that joy with others, and to encourage others to also be joyful. That's very important to me. So for me, that's my personal mission to carry her words forward is to be joyful in all areas of my life, and then to encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, and like one of the things, and we talked a little bit about this off air, that I've been reflecting on and seeing like the breadth of
Hmm.
memorials that folks have been sharing on social media. And it's
Yeah.
not like the generic picture that somebody captures off of Google Images. It's literally a
No.
personal photo where
Yeah.
they met Miss Giovanni, talked to
Hmm.
her, they have her book signing up. And all of the posts, like people are just reflecting on the amazing educator she was, the amazing writer she was, the
Yep.
amazing just everything. She was in her humbleness and her like always giving back. And so I'm, continuing to reflect on how I show up as
Yes.
an artist and as an educator and the importance of, I can't remember who came up with the quote, but it's those who do teach.
Yes.
And that is
Exactly.
definitely something that I learned in watching all of the memorials come out over the past week.
Yes. And you don't have to be an expert to teach. I think people think you have to have a degree or you have to have, like, you can
Mhm.
teach right now where you are. Everyone has a story. And so your teaching may not be poetry. It may be teaching someone how to cook. It may be teaching someone how to sew. Anything that you've been taught as you were younger that you think might be lost now in this next generation, step out and volunteer to teach it. You could even teach it at the community center, do a sewing class, do a painting class. My mom was someone who always taught in the community. And so even sometimes for free. And so I think that, those of us who have these talents and these skills, it is up to us to pass it on to the next generation. Even if they feel like they don't need it, they do need it. And so
Mhm.
step out and be brave to do that.
Nice. And then lastly, what is next for you and how can a Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
So I'm actually working on a documentary about my mother. I've been wanting to do this movie about my mom, about her life. And so this next year, I'm going to be working on that, just trying to figure out how I want it to be, framed and how I want to do it. So that's the first thing is to do a documentary about her life so people know about her childhood, about, her raising us and about her artistic career and how she poured into others. And I'm also I'm working on a few scripts, but a couple of short films I'm working on. One is called Jackpot, and it's about a woman who is given a lottery ticket by someone and wins the lottery and has to figure out, is she going to share it with that person or does she keep it? And so a lot of little stories. But as you know, I'm also working on my doctorate, so
Yeah.
a lot of writing. And so I'm fitting in the creative. I feel like, though, I actually told my advisor this other day, I feel like this doctoral work is helping strengthen my writing muscle. I'm writing more now than I ever have. So if you're thinking about doing a doctorate and you think it's going to take away your creative juices, it will not. It actually is going to strengthen them.
Yeah, and Crystal is doing the program that I graduated from, and the thing that I loved about that program, and it's a very revolutionary doctoral program because it honors where you are and where you're
Right.
going, as opposed to creating mini me's and like
Exactly.
replicating that. And I remember just how much they said to me, because I was like, okay, do I need to separate the creative from the academic and the scholar?
Hmm.
No. They're
No.
like, yeah, they're like, find ways to do that. And I've had actually some faculty support the Black Writers Read podcast.
Oh, awesome. Good. Yeah. I mean, I was worried about the academic writing because it is very different at this level. But
Mhm.
same thing, they told me the same thing. As long as I'm following the formula that we have to follow, I can
Yeah.
still have my voice be part of that. And so it's really been very helpful to do that. And so I'm excited. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you publicly. And people don't know this, but the books I'm using are Nicole's book she gave to me. And so it's almost like she's
Oh,
sitting with me because she's highlighted and has her notes and everything in it. And so it's like she's with me through this whole process. So thank you so much.
you're so welcome, because I will never forget. And I want to share this too. And oh my God, thank you for sharing that. Like, I graduated from the program last October,
Yeah.
and the books were just piling up. And for folks,
Yeah.
I wish I could show you my office. I drive my family. I have maybe over 500 books, and they're
I'm
just,
sure I'm the same. Hmm.
yeah, and they're just piling up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I really want to, gift these books to someone. And then you announced that you were doing the program. And I was like, yep, let's do this.
That was perfect. It was like, it was because, to me, it was like, I was like, God, give me a sign if this is the right thing to do. And when you showed up
Mm,
with that bag of books, I was like, I have no excuse at this point. None. I literally had angels along every path. I mean, from the application process, everything. So I had no excuse. So thank you.
yeah, thank you. And I do want to shout out the Bay Path University Educational Leadership Doctoral Program. Like,
Yes.
it was such a beautiful experience. Like, don't get me wrong. Yes, it's a revolutionary doctoral program, but they kick your butt. And
They do.
my dissertation process, woo, the
Hmm.
writing and the critiquing and the,
Yeah.
like, just the level of support, and also just the guidance they give you. And it I'm very blessed to have found that program and have done it
Right.
at this time in my career.
Yes, it's amazing, and I said this to someone the other day. It's almost like when you go bowling and they put bumpers up so
Yep.
your ball doesn't go into the gutters. That's what
Yep.
BAPAP does.
Yep.
Because those bumpers are your writing coach, they're your faculty advisor, they're your cohort, they're your community, your practice. So there really is no reason why you should not complete the program. You have someone with you the entire way. And I think other programs you join and you're on your own.
Yep.
Even the writing is built into the program. So it's like why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. And I excuse me, and I hope that this is also a lesson to other educators and educational programs, in that you do give the guardrails to your
Yes,
students because you want them to succeed. Because I know there's a lot of old school educators who are like, well, I had it hard, so I'm gonna make it hard.
exactly.
You can make it hard, but just
Hmm.
don't make it impossible.
Exactly. And give people community. I think not everybody needs it, right? Some people are going to go
Mhm.
through this program and never go on the weekly live that we do.
Mhm.
Some of them won't ever use the writing coach, or they feel like they don't need it or they don't have time, and that's fine. But I think a lot of us, I mean, I know I appreciate the community because I feel like I have friends in the program that are going to cheer me on. And I think
Yeah.
that's important, especially at this age. I need that.
Yeah. And I still like our community of practice text thread. Woo! We still
Oh,
have the text thread.
I'm sure. Yeah, we have a Google chat that we're in all the time. Yeah.
Nice.
Hmm.
So thank you so much, Crystal, for
You're
being
very
on Black
welcome.
Writers Read. It means so much that you're writing, and it also means a lot, even more so, how much you show up in our community. Like,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I mean, I enjoy my people. I enjoy teaching others. I enjoy leading others. I love seeing people publish books and celebrating that with them because a lot of people think they can't do it. And I always say, anyone can do it. And if you're not a great writer, get an editor. Make sure someone's helping you along the way.
Yeah. And thank you also too for calling out hiring an editor, because I feel like
Oh,
the writing process is very solitary, but the sharing of the writing is a very collaborative experience. And right now I have like a book coach, I have a writing coach to
yeah.
help me with some of my writing.
And I'll tell you something that happened. So my first children's book, Gabby Saturday, I self-published it, used a local printer here in the area, and published it. Did some book signings, and at the second signing, I get a phone call that there's a typo on like page 11 in the book. And so if I'd had an editor, I would have known that. So I had to end up, not recalling all of them, but reprinting a bunch, and it ended up being very expensive. And so that's why I tell people, like, even if I think people think children's books are only 25 pages, it's not a lot of words. Even the children's books, make sure you have someone look it over for you.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to insert like one last question, and I hope this is okay.
Yeah.
So you publish under what is it, Gabby Girl
Gabby Girl
Media?
Media. Mm-hmm.
And then also Gabby Saturday. I would love, who's Gabby?
So Gabby is a little girl. My mom and I came up with her. We probably 12 years ago. We knew we were going to write a book about a little girl that wore a yellow dress. We actually argued about what she was going to wear, though. My mom wanted her to have a yellow dress. I wanted her to be more modern, like with jeans and sneakers. My mom was very old school, so my mom put her in the yellow dress with the ruffle socks and the patent leather shoes and a little purse. But Gabby was short for Gabrielle. But in my head, we called her Gabby because she talked a lot. She's like just a talker. And so mom didn't make her look like me. Her skin's a little more brown than mine, but she had curly hair like mine. And but looking back on it, I don't know if you remember the Sesame Street clip that they used to have. It used to be a little ad they used to run with the yellow dress and where she was going to the
Bread,
store.
milk.
Yes,
Yep,
exactly.
going to the store.
Yep. So when I look back on it, I'm like, I wonder if my mother remembered that, because when I look at that clip, she has a yellow dress and a yellow ribbon in her hair. And so now when we go out to schools, like we hand out yellow ribbons, that's kind of our symbol of kindness. And so little girls get little headbands with the ribbon. I actually have one I wear when I do school appearances. And so Gabby to me is a symbol of talking a lot, right? But a symbol of joy. And that's why it's yellow is her color.
Oh, that's so sweet. But I remember that. I can't remember the list. It was like bread, milk.
Loaf of bread. Yep. A loaf
Yep.
of bread, container of milk, and a stick of butter. Yep. And actually I have the book here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So people can see it. That's Gabby. Yep.
So cute.
Yeah.
Yes. So Crystal, thank you so much for being
Thank you so much.
today.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up, and we can touch base a little after.
Okay.
Oop, I took her off too fast. So thank you so much for joining us for episode 11 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. Stay tuned to Black Writers Read on Instagram at Black Writers Read, or on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Nicole Young Martin, for announcements on our last guests of 2024. Support Black Writers Read by subscribing to my YouTube channel, where many of you are joining us from today, or the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Also, feel free to drop a review of Black Writers Read on the podcast, as by supporting me as a subscriber or a reviewer, you're growing our community, which can lead to longer-term sustainability and support. Also, you can visit the website at Black Writers Read to learn more about the podcast. So thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. For folks who are joining me from the United States East Coast, it is dark, and it's not even 5 o'clock yet. So thank you for joining me for the beginning of your evening, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. I will see you next week.